fresh now on digestion, and mentioned that what we're trying to do is to take a morsel of food, let's say a really unhealthy lunch, a double cheeseburger, a supersized French fries, something with milk in it, like a malt or something. And just because you want to appear to be healthy, you'll get a Diet Coke. But what you're going to have to do in preparation is to make sure, nutritionally speaking, that you know that those foods have nutrients in them, namely carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, vitamins, minerals. Be aware of that, and be aware that we have to take each one of those huge physical entities and turn it into almost a liquid and break down the big molecules into monosaccharides, fatty acids, glyceride, amino acids, nucleotides. You have to know that. If you don't know that already, then you come to class probably ill prepared, because you've been eating now for a long time, and you should know what you're absorbing into your body. But we have to break those down. That is exactly what the chemical process of digestion is, and the physical is getting it into a state where it's small enough so that an enzyme plus a substrate, which we've done already, can become an enzyme substrate complex, which we've done already, correct? What's happening in the ESC? For a point, raise your hand. Who hasn't had a point? Who hasn't had a point? Complex. But what's happening here?
It breaks down like we use sucrase as sucrose we broke down.
But what is it, what's happening? Now, what's the end result? What is actually happening? Way back. Yeah, lowering the level of energy of activation. That's holding those things together. And yes, as a result, you break it down into smaller entities. That's what's happening, so you end up getting a new product plus the enzyme being reused. In one of the labs, you're going to talk about this happening, and you're going to influence whether temperature being higher or lower, or pH being higher or lower. Will it have an effect on efficiency? So those are things that you pick up in the lab, bring here to this class. So, what we're trying to do is this, which is chemical. But getting it from a chunk of hamburger down to a semi-liquid like in the chyme, that is physical. So do know the difference between the two. But no matter what, once it gets past your mouth, now the mouth is in a slightly different arrangement of tissues. So let's say from the esophagus, all the way to the end of this is just a tube. It's like a piece of outer substance of a piece of boudin. That's all it is. And it's got a space where your food will be. Lumen is called a lumen. And right next to it will be some tissue called the mucosa. And below that is the submucosa. Further away is a muscle tube, most of which you feel in that intestine is muscle. And then on the outermost layer, the part like if you cut yourself open, go like this, grab your intestine, you're touching the serosa. And so the tube is pretty much the same in all of these layers from the esophagus down. They differ a little bit from one part of the tube to another, such as esophagus, stomach, duodenum, etc., based upon what's happening in that part. So it's going to be important for you to understand that the health and the structure of this tube better be healthy. Because if you have a breakdown in the mucosa, you're going to get an ulcer. If you have something wrong with the muscularis externa, you might end up with constipation or diarrhea. If you have something wrong with the serosa, you might end up with adhesions and scar tissue. Autoimmune disorders, lupus, Crohn's disease, all of these things. So it's important that you get a feel for just what these layers are, what's in them. So the food is in the lumen. And so right here, we're going to talk, well, first of all, this whole thing right here, from here to here, this is a round with a hole in the middle. And this is what you're touching right here. If you put that piece of intestine in here, the space around it is your abdominal peritoneal cavity. And this blue line is your body wall. Okay? So what would this be right here for a point? What would this right here, I'll put a teasing in right here. What would this first thing be? Yeah. No, the green cube, or whatever color that is. But in particular. But what's it called? You'll know it. We've talked about it before. Oh, no. You just said something else. Don't say that. Black. Peritoneum? I can't even say the right word now. Peritoneum. Yeah. Yes, but? Parietal peritoneum. Parietal. So that makes this the visceral peritoneum. This is a cavity. Okay? You were trying. Okay. So let's begin with the mucosa, and let's pretend we're in the duodenum, however you want to call it. I'll probably just call it the duodenum. But once again, keep in mind, I have had people come up and scoff and say, oh, so-and-so doesn't know what they're talking about because they pronounce it this way. Well, believe me, Louisiana is not the Mecca. So, there's lots of places, different pronunciations. Never fault a person for the pronunciation, unless, of course, they're just a beginning student. Okay. We're going to clean this with commentary. Okay. So this is the duodenum. And what is the epithelium? Compound or simple? I mean, simple columnar epithelium. What are these circles? What's this? Basement membrane. What's this? Microvilli. Why do we have microvilli here? Absorption and secretion. What's this? The lumen, where your food is. What might this be? A goblet cell. So then I'm going to have in this mucosa, the mucosa is from here to here. That's the mucosa. muscle and is called the muscularis mucosa. It separates the mucosa from the submucosa. Okay, so this, what kind of tissue do you suppose this is? Connective tissue connects this to this. And what cell made most of this connective tissue? Or point, raise your hand. Someone who hasn't had a point? Fibroblasts. Do you think there's any other cells running around in here? Like what? Good. Where did that come from? Good. What other kinds? What? I didn't hear that.
She said plasma cells.
Yes. Plasma cells, macrophages, mast cells, and fibroblasts. Plus there will be fibers in here, won't there? The collagen fibers. Now there's also going to be things in here such as capillaries. There's going to be some neurons in here. There's going to be possibly some glands going out like this, making mucus, maybe making enzymes, maybe making acids, whatever the case may be. This will have a bunch of stuff in here. Some of it to put out here, and for example, the capillary is here because we want the food that's digested to pass through these cells and get into our blood, correct? Isn't that the purpose? Once the food is absorbed into our blood, it runs around to take care of the needs of your cells. Well, what if you happen to have had a burger from Jack in the Box about 10 years ago? What might you have gotten in that burger? What? Well, I hope so, but in this case, you got a little more than protein. You got some E. coli. I mean, they had a big stink about it. Well, so you could have an E. coli right here, couldn't you? And just because you ate it doesn't mean it's going to go straight through. It can go right and left as well. So what if it decided to slip on through? Do you want it to get into the capillary and go all over your body?
No.
So what do you want in here to take care of it? A macrophage or plasma cells. That's what they're there for. That's why you want to have them. And you don't want your immune system to be compromised. So think of this connective tissue then as a great place for good stuff. And so if I were to ask you what belongs to the mucosa of the lining of the duodenum, I could throw in some words. You know, I could put capillaries, I could put nerves, I could put glands, I could put all kinds of things. And you have to be able to pick which one isn't in there. Or I might show a picture of something like this, and you have to, make a decision, whatever. So that's what the mucosa is, facing the lumen. And you want it to stay healthy. You don't want these cells to break down. They have great tight junctions here. You don't want stuff that's not finished being digested slipping through these holes. Because if they did, your body's going to look at it and say, I don't recognize it. The plasma cells will try to shoot it out of the water and destroy it, And you'll end up with inflammation, maybe Crohn's, maybe colitis, spastic colon, ulcers, comes from things like this. So if you know that foods do not agree with you, that means stop eating them. Because if you continue to go, I'll suffer because I love the flavor. Don't do that. Because you're setting yourself up every time for inflammation. And in time, it will not be able to repair itself. And you'll get yourself some real intestinal problems. So just follow your body's clue. If you get diarrhea, if you throw up, if you get heartburn, stop eating it. So, right below the mucosa is the submucosa. It's simply more of the same thing, but it is a distinct layer. It's connective tissue, blood vessels, nerve nets, even some lymphatic structures, glands, etc. Now, that's the submucosa. The muscularis externa is this curlicue layer. It consists of two layers, for the most part, along the tube, except the upper esophagus. It's two layers of smooth muscle. The inner layer runs circular around, and it goes like this. It squeezes like this. The outer layer runs parallel, and so it goes like this. So together, it manages to get the food not only pulverized, but pushing it forward, or what's called analward. There's a law, it's called the law of the gut. It means that it moves from the mouth to the anus. There are nerve nets that are polarized in that direction, which thank God is true. They have some babies born, and the polarity is reversed. They will not survive. The polarity is not from mouth to anus, but anus to mouth. And of course, they're not digesting food in the fetal stage, so it's not until they're born that that abnormality is discovered. So, anyway, how did I get, oh yeah. And so be aware that that muscular tube, when you touch those guts, so to speak, in those cats, you're touching mostly that muscle layer. That's what gives it its form. And so the movement from mouth to anus is by a gradual kind of peristaltic motion. And is controlled by a special nerve net. And I'll talk about that after I finish the rest of this. But you will also definitely need to talk about and study, not talk about it, study more the different kinds of movement in the tube. I will talk about them as well. So, circular goes this way and longitudinal this way to encourage the gradual movement at an optimal rate from mouth to anus, so you don't end up with constipation and you don't end up with diarrhea. And then the outermost is just a kind of thin film. When you touch that muscle in the lab, make sure you do that. The very first thing you're touching is this, just simple squamous cells with a little bit of connective tissue. And these two layers would be a serous membrane, and it releases just a little bit of watery fluid, enough to make those intestines slip and slide inside your space. If you didn't have that, you could walk down the street and all of a sudden that intestine might hit the body wall and hook onto it and create, an adhesion, actually. Another kind of, not for children. I had a daughter who, when she was a junior or senior in high school, I don't remember either, she ended up getting in a car accident, and she's the only person that's hurt. She's sitting in the back seat in the middle of a car. She's the only one with seatbelts on, the only one seriously hurt, but she still wears seatbelts. What had happened, well, anyway, she ends up, somebody called and said, hey, she's been in an accident, she's been in So they said she was just walking around fine, but all of a sudden, boom, over she went. And so they had her in the ambulance by the time I got there, rushed her to the hospital, and they took a bunch of tests, whatever, and the admitting doctor said, well, I think she's okay. She's got a little bit of blood accumulated on the liver, not concerned, but she did not look good. Not to me, anyway. And moms always know, whether anybody else believes it or not. And he said, I think we'll send her home. I said, no, I don't think you will. I said, because I think there's something amiss. So just the next shift came in and the doctor on call, I knew him. And he said, oh, of course we're gonna keep her. Well, they kept her, and over the night she kept getting worse and worse. And Saturday, it was a Friday and Saturday, worse, running a fever, starting to get a high white count, and all of this. And they were perplexed. So they said, well, I guess we better go in and take a look. I said, well, I was wondering how long it was going to take you to make that recommendation. So they operated on her at 3 in the afternoon on Sunday. If they'd waited 2 more hours, she would have a life of a permanent colostomy. There was not a thing wrong with her though, right? So what had happened was, her seatbelt was in one of these cars where they had not yet had to adjust them. They were the ones that fit wrong over the abdomen, and it compressed the blood flow to her transverse colon. Her entire transverse colon was gone. It was dead as a doornail. They had to remove all of that, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that fine and dandy, and she managed to make it through all of that. About 10 years later, she doubles over in pain, and she thought, oh my God, Oh, anyway, we took her to the emergency room. Lo and behold, they opened her up. And what had happened was, they discovered that, you know how the intestine is coiled like this? This had adhered to this. Called adhesion, the scar tissue had formed. Typically, if this were to touch this, because of that serous membrane, it would just slip aside. But what had happened during this primary surgery, this tissue, this serosa, had been damaged from knocking them around. And it wasn't intentional, let's knock them around, but they do. So when they closed her up and everything, there was too many opportunities for these coils to touch and form scar tissue. She had massive scar tissue, and things couldn't get through. So she was fortunate to have a doctor who had done this one time before. He knew that was a problem. And so he inserted a tube that went through her entire intestine, small intestine. And then the tube came out right around here. They kept that tube in there for about 6 weeks what the tube did was it kept it from coiling to the point where one part could touch the other part. And by the time 6 weeks passed, they assumed that serosa had healed itself. So then they removed the tube, and you know, like 20 years later, everything is perfectly fine. She never had another problem. But that's because they now understood the importance of histology, the importance of tissues and their ability to do their job, etc. So, the serosa must release a kind of fluidy substance, so it will just slip and slide. Okay? Any questions about these 4 layers? You're going to find them everywhere. The only one might be the serosa, because sometimes if it's not running through a space, it won't have a serosa. It'll just have connective tissue. So, we must keep the health of this in mind throughout your experience here. But what I'm going to do now is every time we go from mouth to esophagus to stomach to small intestine, I will mention how it varies from this generic tube. Okay? And all these differences will be based upon what does that part of the system do for you. Okay? Any questions so far about any of the layers? None? Okay, so now we're going to start with the mouth. Good place to start. By the way, no doubt find anybody else signing in for somebody, because my secretaries are getting onto this. They've seen seven different situations where people are signing in. Don't sign in for somebody else, because you'll be pulled on the carpet and accused of something that you don't want to be accused of. Okay, now, obviously, we're not going to go into your teeth and your tongue and all that stuff. We're only going to, and much of this is anatomy, should be learned in the lab, but do know that when the food enters your mouth, the purpose of the mouth is to begin the physical breakdown, and that the lining of the mouth is not simple columnar epithelium. It's mucousy stratified squamous. It's like your outer skin, except in the mucousy variety. And, you know, you've got a lot of skeletal muscle in order to be able to talk and to swallow and to chew. No smooth muscle. So that's why I excluded it in that generic consideration. But the purpose is to take that morsel of food and mix it with a substance called saliva. And saliva is the product of these glands, the parotid, the submandibular, sometimes it's called the submaxillary, and the sublingual glands. You are to make a list of what ultimately is in saliva and why is it in there. That you can do, doesn't require me telling you. But these are the 3 main glands, and then I wanted to put, where did I put it? the product of these three makes saliva. We want the saliva to be kind of mucousy. So there will be some mucin, which is a protein. We will have two enzymes being produced. One is called salivary amylase, and the other one is called lingual lipase. The majority of the substance comes from the carotid, and it contains these enzymes and a lot of watery muciny substance, but mostly watery. The submandibular produces both enzymes, watery stuff, and mucin. The sublingual is almost all mucin. But we want to mix that food and break it down physically so that it's capable of being swallowed. Have you ever tried to swallow something prematurely? It doesn't go down. It's sort of, you got to start all over again when you try to swallow it too soon. When it's ready to be swallowed, it's called the bolus. And getting mixed with that mucin and saliva is making it capable of being easily swallowed, but also for you to smell and taste your food requires a level of moisture that's provided by saliva. So to be able to swallow, to appreciate, those are all physical things. But these two enzymes will be the only potential chemical breakdown. And lingual lipase will do nothing in the mouth because the pH in the mouth is not acidic enough. So if you chew your food slowly, like most people should, to appreciate their food so they don't eat so much, but to enjoy what they're doing. I was watching the other night that show Once in a While on 48, where they got that 600-pound people. Oh my God, have you ever watched them inhale that food? They are not appreciating what they're eating at all. Otherwise, they take their time, Anyway, so if you chew your food a certain number of times, and they got these people, that get these NSF grants, or get some kind of governmental grant to count how many times you should chew. Yeah, what a waste of money. But anyway, there is an ideal number of chews per mouthful. That's supposed to be optimal, and everybody cares. But if you do take your time, that salivary amylase, which is an enzyme, can act upon carbohydrates, which will be the substrate, to form the enzyme substrate complex and produce disaccharides. Disaccharides, right? Okay. Plus the enzyme ready to be used again. And so if you want to get some of your carbohydrates that you're eating broken down, just keep it in the mouth for a while and chew it, mix it. Because if you don't get it mixed, if the enzyme doesn't touch the substrate, it's useless. It's got to touch, right? It's like mixing, stirring, whatever is important. This is not going to happen. So now remember, this is the picture we used in the first test. And this was the enzyme, this was the substrate, this is, lower the level of energy of activation. Refresh your memory on that. That's why the first stuff we've learned this semester is supposed to stay with you and you build upon it. Okay. So let's say you mixed up the food, you got it small enough, this salivary amylase acted upon it, now you're ready to undergo the swallowing technique, which is a reflex. Once the food, the bolus, touches the back of your palate, your soft palate, it causes the swallowing reflex to happen. We'll learn about swallowing and defecation reflexes in 318 more thoroughly, but just know you start to swallow it, and it's going to move to the back of the mouth, the oral pharynx, get into the shared space called the laryngopharynx. Then it goes into the esophagus. So we'll draw the esophagus. Here's the esophagus. And so the esophagus is really nothing more sophisticated than a slide that carries your butt down into the swimming pool. It just simply, down it goes, delivers your derriere to the swimming pool. So it delivers the bolus to right here. Now, the upper third has to be skeletal muscle, because that allows you to swallow as well as to throw up. You cannot vomit if this were smooth muscle. So once it gets past the upper third, the muscle in this layer becomes smooth muscle. This is a variation from the generic tube I just talked about. So if I had a test item, I could say, which of the following is not appropriate for the esophagus? And I might, whatever. You have to know the basic differences between esophagus, stomach, small intestine. I'll give them to you each time we move to another subpart. So, upper third is skeletal, the bottom 2/3 is smooth. So if this is the bolus right here, another oddity here is the lining is still mucousy stratified squamous, because there's a lot of abrasion, correct? I mean, sometimes you're swallowing dry bread, big pieces of chunky stuff that rubs against the surface, so you've got to have quick replenishing. So it's mucousy stratified squamous here. The rest of the tube, simple columnar. Another exception to the, yes,
The mucousy stratified squamous is at the top, at the one.
is from the mouth all the way to here.
Okay.
Another thing, the esophagus has to be able to expand quickly and evenly in case you're trying to swallow a huge something. Or if you're drinking water, you have to have versatility. So another oddity for that is, it's got a bunch of longitudinal folds of the mucosa. So that kind of like an accordion. So it can go out and back and out and back. So mucousy stratified squamous, upper third skeletal, lower 2/3 smooth, longitudinal folds. Got that? So now, as the food gets right here where it's smooth muscle, then peristalsis begins. Peristalsis is the gradual inward flow of stimuli to encourage the movement downward. In order to do that, you have to have a nerve net. A nerve net is hard to explain, but physically, pay attention to this. You've all seen, and now they come back, you know those stockings that streetwalkers used to wear in the 50s? You know, some of them had the actual thing up the back of the leg and everything. You always knew the streetwalkers were wearing those stockings. Well, think of that. Does it conjure up a picture to you, or is it too long ago? They've come back. I mean, some people wear them just to go to like fishnet. What? Yeah. Fishnet stockings, yeah. Well, if you took one of those stockings, cut off the foot, and if it's hooked to a panty, cut it off. Just get that net. If you take that, and that's all that is a relationship of neurons to one another. Your body's axons, all connected. It's a nerve net. Just take it and put it between the circular and the longitudinal muscle there, and pull it all the way down to the anus. Then the top part, you know how years ago you didn't have the panty part, you had those little, what do you call that, garters? Everybody knows garters. They still use those, but that's a different shop you buy those. Instead of having them hooked to garters, they're hooked to your sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve system. So that what system's going to turn on the intestine? Well, yeah, autonomic, which part? Did you say sympathetic? No. Para, remember? You don't want to be defecating when you run down the hall, right? Just the opposite. Parasympathetic is going to turn that nerve net on, and guess what happens to peristalsis? You could get diarrhea. Yeah. If it doesn't turn on, you could get constipation. So, that nerve net is called the myenteric. Remember it. Myenteric plexus. Plexus means nerve net. So it starts here and all the way down to the bottom. Now, when the bolus gets here, the movement of peristalsis makes this constrictor valve open, and in comes the bolus. And this upper part of the stomach is called the cardiac part. And then you have a fundus part. And you have a body part. And you have a pyloric part of the stomach. The valve that empties the stomach is called a pyloric valve. So the top of here is cardiac, the fundus part, the body part, the pyloric part. So it's going to make its way through the stomach. The purpose of the stomach is not what little kids think. Because you ask the little kid, what do you think is the most important part of your intestinal system? They're going to say, of course it has to be your stomach. After all, their mother has a baby in hers. Yeah, these mothers will say, where is it? Oh, it's in my tummy, of course. Don't tell them that. They worry about swallowing a watermelon seed. Yeah, they will get one too. You know, just be honest and say, hey, how about a uterus? So, I mean, like they can't improve their vocabulary even if they're 4 years old. Yeah.
What did you say the valve was between the esophagus and the part of the
This is called, well, this can be called the cardiac sphincter, but it can also be called esophagio-gastro.
Okay.
It's got like 3 different names, but it's a sphincter. This is not terribly tight, by the way, and so some of you who eat late at night, or you lie down right away after you eat, it's easy from the contents of the stomach to put too much pressure on this. And so therefore some of the acids will regurgitate up here. What's bad about that is your epithelium here is not adjusted for the acidity of the stomach. So over long periods of time of exposure to this gastric reflux, you're setting yourself up for esophageal cancer. And I had a neighbor who died at the age of 33 because of untreated gastric reflux. And he had the predisposition. That's not going to happen to everybody, but he happened to have that predisposition. I think you could have waited. Don't you? Thank you. Anyway, yeah. So don't do that. I mean, and if you have gastric reflux, don't just, leave it untreated. Yes. Wait.
What part of the esophagus did you say was simple colon?
None of it is. Simple colon.
And what was?
It's mucously stratified spleen, just like the mouth. You said the esophagus?
You said the rest of the tube was simple colon.
Or from here to the rest of the system, simple colon. Okay, yeah,